And that's part of a longer term trend. GAO sent a letter to Congress last year and saying that at least at DoD or Department of War, now there was a protests are down about 48% since 2015. And when you include all agencies, protests are down about 32% at GAO. So protests are not, in fact, increasing; they're decreasing, and they're infrequent to begin with. And then the last, I think, misconception that's out there, and I hear this all the time, is that most protests are frivolous. You got a bunch of folks who are filing frivolous protests that they're just meant to gum up the works and delay things. And I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen, but again, the statistics tell a different story, because when you go to GAO and look at their statistics, you find out that year over year, protesters have what's called an effectiveness rate of more than 50%. Now, keep in mind, when a protester goes into GAO, they have the burden of proving their case, and more than half of the time, they either get a sustained decision from GAO, upholding that protest, or the agency voluntarily takes corrective action, which is considered an effective protest as well, because the agency essentially gives you what you're asking for without having to go through the full process. And so year over year, that's more than 52% that protesters have an effective protest. They prevail on an argument. That doesn't mean they always get the contract, by the way. That means they might get another bite at the apple of the contract. But that's a different question about whether the protest is frivolous. And so, I think those are the three biggest common misconceptions that I see. How prevalent are protests? Are they on the rise? And how effective they are, as well as that misconception that if I file a protest, a good faith protest, a professional protest, I'm going to get blackballed and I'll never do business with the government again, which is not true as well.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of misconceptions out there. Let's talk and we're going to go through each one of these pre-award protests, post-award protests. We're going to talk about defending protests, which is another important aspect. But let's first start with the pre-award protest. Nicole, what are some of the common pre-award protests that you deal with a lot in your practice that you see out there? And I think these are good to kind of list out, because I think that a lot of people maybe simply don't know certain scenarios where they have the ability to protest in pre-award. So can you
Yeah.
share some of those examples?
Yeah, I would love to. And I think you're really spot on. And I think the important takeaway from this from the beginning is going to need to be that being aware of your right and when a protest is appropriate, but also the fact that the pre-award protests are generally going to have the tightest timeframes of everything. And I say tightest, yes, it's going to be, sometimes 5 and 10 days to get the stay of award for the post-award stuff. But with the pre-award, your protests are due, and I know we'll probably talk about timeliness more, but I just think this is important for what we're getting into here. They're due at the time your proposals are due. And that's the time. That's not just on the day. That's the exact time the proposals are due. That's really important because I think you nailed it. I get so many clients, blog readers, et cetera, that come to me and either want to talk about a post-award protest or maybe just have an issue with some, contract pricing or something, even if they are the awardee, and they take it back to, well, really, there was an issue with the solicitation. And right there is just like, oh, wah every single time, because I'm like, man, we really, you don't have any right to have an issue with that now. You had to raise that. So I think that's one of the most common ones right there, which would be the terms of the solicitation itself. I always remind people that for the most part, it's not your contracting officers that are out there writing these solicitations in great detail and then issuing them and then administering the entire contract just out of their brain. Obviously, they're not experts in all this highly technical stuff. And yes, they contribute to those things, but a lot of times it is a different contractor that's contracted to write a highly technical solicitation, or it's a specialized, representative that does so. And they cannot simply be experts in everything. And another reason that the protest process is such an important thing is a lot of times the experts are my clients and are these, blog readers and these contractors themselves. And I tell them that they often come to me freaking out about the terms of a solicitation. And I'm like, hey, that this is a great point. You probably know more about this area than they do. And again, to go to Steve's point, as long as you politely, respectfully raise those issues, you can very often, I don't know statistically, but I know that pre-award protests tend to be better arguments, tend to have more success. And at least in my experience, we have a lot of luck with those. And I've even gotten to the point in the last couple of years, I've seen enough success with simply writing an agency letter that
Mhm.
that is one of the few areas that I don't say, oh, let's immediately protest. If
Yeah.
you come to me and we've got a couple months before your deadline, or a good amount of time, let's just send them an email or a letter that says, hey, just wanted to let you know, the time frame you put in here for pouring concrete is physically impossible in this weather. That's an example of one I've seen. But things like that, or even as simple as, you have a transition time here of 1 week, but as a contractor that's done this for a long time, I'm telling you to get the equipment, facilities, everything needed. Maybe there's a certification needed. It's going to take longer. So things like that are really good terms of the solicitation protest. But you then also just have kind of the bigger picture. And I think these are often ones people don't think of protesting immediately, but things like, is this a small business set aside? Should it be a small business set aside?
Yeah.
Is it an 8A? Should it be an 8A set aside? Is it something that, under Kingdom where you've got the rule of two for the service disabled veteran owned and the veteran owned companies if it's a VA solicitation? Those are also protests we see a lot of. And then you've even got like the NAICS code protests. A lot of people don't even know is a thing. Why does it matter if a CO puts a wrong NAICS code on a solicitation? It can matter for a lot of reasons. That's going to dictate the size of company that's allowed to bid. And if it's a $5 million jump annually in one NAICS code to the next, that could greatly expand or reduce the size of the competition pool. And then you've also got the limitation on subcontracting and other things that are going to depend very much on what the contract is categorized as. So those are a couple good examples of pre-award protest issues. And I'm sure there's a couple other, but I'm kind of blanking on them at the moment. I would say those are the main
That's all
ones.
right. It's good
Yeah,
because that's where I was going to go to Steven next. So
good.
where
Perfect.
did Nicole blank out on that?
Yes,
Now
where did I blank out,
I was
Steve?
gonna ask Steven, with
Yeah,
same regard in pre-award protests, because I had asked you what some of the common ones are.
yeah.
What are some of the things that maybe are not so common, but were also powerful that contractors often kind of overlook?
Yeah, and I think I do want to highlight what Nicole said there regarding the relationship with the contracting officers before I dive into that, because a lot of folks who come to an attorney and they're thinking about a protest, they're like, how is this going to affect my relationship with the contracting
Right.
officer if I file this thing? And Nicole hit the nail on the head there. If you have time, you know, contact that contracting officer or whoever's running that acquisition. And say, hey, there's a problem with your solicitation. We really don't want to protest it. We're not protest happy company, but could you please take a look at this? And then if you do end up having to file a protest, they know that you've already tried to work that out with them. You're not just throwing this on them at the last minute. And then the other thing that you hit on that's really important for folks to realize is that you can't just wait and see how things play out. If there's a clear problem with the solicitation, for example, I saw one where there was one piece of the solicitation that said the base period was 9 months, and another part of the solicitation said it was 12 months. And so that's a clear contradiction. If you write to the agency and say, hey, here's what I've noticed, they're going to
Yeah.
fix that. I mean, they're going to fix that. You don't have to even protest if there's time to work it out in advance. But this particular case, the company didn't do that. They guessed what the period of performance was, built their pricing around that, and then the agency took the other view. And then they came afterward and said, oh, now we want to protest it. And you can't do it then because you can't protest a patent defect in the solicitation after the award decision has been made. So just seeing a problem in the solicitation saying, we're going to wait and see how it plays out, you've decided not to protest at that point because you're going to lose your protest rights if you wait until after that due date passes. So yeah, I mean, I think Nicole got it in terms of the, when would you file that pre-award protest? That's what I've seen. It's some sort of defect in the solicitation. It could be internal inconsistencies in the solicitation or contradictions. It could be the set-aside designation on that solicitation. It could be things that, as she said, in the industry, well that, hey, this is just not achievable. It's not realistic. The qualifications you're asking for are not accurate. Or it could be those NAICS code appeals, which are a separate beast of pre-award protests because they they don't go to the GAO or Court of Federal Claims. You have to file those
Yeah.
with the SBA, and they have a separate deadline. You have to file them within 10 days of when the solicitation is issued, or an amendment to change that NAICS code. And so you have to be careful. But those NAICS codes appeals are seldom used, but they can be really powerful. They can, as Nicole said, dramatically change the contours of the competitive playing field. And I've seen competitions, the competitive pool shrink from a 1,250 employee size standard to a $30 million size standard, or something like that. That's something very dramatic based on a NAICS code appeal. So those, I think she got it. I don't have any more like secret pre-award protest ones, but I did want to highlight those relationship pieces, because I've had that conversation with folks so many times, and how you can approach this in a respectful way, and make sure the agency knows that protest is kind of your last resort, but you're trying to work it out with them, assuming the time is there to do that. But if that fails, then you have to preserve your rights, and then you file protest.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I'm hearing from both of you there is that there's, try the path that's, I guess the path of least resistance. I'm not sure if protest is resistance, but just by sending a letter or communicating effectively with the contracting officers could help resolve an issue without having to get to that phase to begin with. And that's one of the things that you can also help contractors with out. And you have done it, Stephen. You're now retired, and I'm sure you've done quite a bit of those as well, Nicole. So before we move off of this, there's one more other thing I want to talk about with the pre-award protest. What about protesting a timeline of a solicitation? Are there some specific regulations around how long an agency is supposed to put out something? Because we see this in various ways. Sometimes we see a 30-day solicitation window. Sometimes we see a 2-week solicitation window. How would a contractor know whether or not there is like a formal solicitation period that needs to be kind of set out by the FAR, I guess? I know that kind of happens in construction acquisitions, but in other situations, how will they know if there's even if the timeline is really not adhering to the FAR?
Yeah. I couldn't tell you the exact language. I've done protests on this basis before, and I want to say I can easily pull it up, but I want to say it's kind of more of a reasonableness standard, that it's something about because I mean I've seen some. I saw one for it was like medical equipment and medical trailers for the VA, and there was like a 1 or 2 week response time allowed by the solicitation. And naturally, we protested and we said that it was just not enough time to come. And we used the language that's very, very well known case law, which is basically the allowing offers to intelligently respond to the solicitation, and be able to understand what it is they're proposing instead of just throwing stuff out there. Because, the argument is in the end, that's going to reduce the amount of actual contract disputes, right? If we don't know what we're bidding here, and you're not giving us enough time to really, speak to whatever experts we may need, whatever equipment we may need. Some solicitations, and I think it's really going to depend on the kind of work. Some solicitations, 1 to 2 weeks may be absolutely fine. I think on a lot of IDIQs where everybody's been vetted, they already kind of know what's going on, and it's more of just a, here's the need at this point in time, the number, what we're looking for, and when. A lot of times those shorter ones are going to be fine. Where you are looking at ones where you have to talk to third parties, you're going to need some subcontractors, vendors, or specialty personnel, key personnel, things like that. And really, I do know for sure it's a very case by case type thing. There's not a set time that's reasonable or unreasonable, and it's about how well you argue that. I believe the time I argued it, and I think we've argued it twice for the same type of work. I think one of the times that actually was, they said it was reasonable. It was something that was within the agency's discretion and meeting their needs. The other time, I believe they took a corrective action because I think they kind of agreed they weren't getting very knowledgeable proposals. They were getting kind of just send it if you got to send it. But yeah, I'm sure Steve might have a little more knowledge on that one too, because I haven't done a lot of those, but you are right that that's a thing.
Yeah, and so that's usually how it works out. There are a few cases under the FAR point 5.2, where the agency does have a hard and fast time frame they're supposed to allow. So, when you have an architect or engineering type solicitation, they're supposed to allow at least 30 days. And then, the FAR says this is one of those rules where the exception kind of swallows the rule in most cases, but there is a requirement for a 30-day response time when the solicitation is not for commercial products or services, which very many are, and is above the simplified acquisition threshold. In that case, the agency is supposed to allow at least 30 days, and there's a 45-day response time, I believe, for R&D type services above the simplified acquisition threshold. Most of these cases we see involves commercial products and services, and so now we don't have a hard and fast response time. And so, as Nicole's talking about, in those cases, it's really like what's reasonable under the circumstances. And so I've seen a couple of protests sustained where the agency literally gave someone a few hours, like they put out a solicitation and they're like, it's like, I'm not making up the facts, but it's similar to what I've seen where it's 4 p.m. on Friday and they put out a solicitation saying it's due at 8 a.m. on Monday. Not only is it only 1 hour of business time that was on the street, and the GAO was like, well, that's not reasonable, even though you needed fuel for your jet, that then you need it quickly. Quickly is fine. You could have done maybe 2 business days, but 2 business hours was not sufficient. So then it becomes very much a case by case type basis, and that's when your attorneys, if you're protesting this with an attorney or considering it, are going to have to pull some case law from the GAO and Court of Federal Claims and see how that's been looked at in similar cases.
Yeah. How about pre-award protests? I mean, post-award protests. So same kind of line of questions, Stephen. I'll start with you this time. Could you talk about what some of the most common post-award protest scenarios that you've seen and filed over your career have been?
Yeah, and so usually you're arguing at a big picture level one of two things or both of two things, and that is A, the agency evaluated our proposal wrong, B, they evaluated the other guy's proposal wrong, the awardee, or C, both. I mean, those are kind of the big categories in which you find yourself. And so the arguments can take then many twists from there. So usually you see some level of the agency's evaluation was inconsistent with the solicitation in some way, and or inconsistent with the FAR or some sort of underlying law. So that's a big category that can accommodate a lot of different arguments. You can then put in other arguments such as that the agency applied evaluation criteria that weren't in the solicitation. It's an argument called unstated evaluation criteria. They evaluated us on something that we had no basis to know was there. Another common one is what we call an unequal or unfair type evaluation situation where they applied one standard to us but another standard to the awardee. They didn't treat us equally in the evaluation of proposals. They gave them a strength for the same feature that they didn't give us a strength for example. And so those are some of the kind of the big categories of things that you see. There are rooms for other arguments that don't work, like the agency was biased against us. Like I almost never would recommend filing that argument because it's worked. I looked at this once, like it literally worked like once ever at GAO in the last 30 years, and that was where the official in question had, in a separate court case, submitted a sworn statement saying that she had been biased, and so they were able to use that statement and like, okay, well, yeah, she was biased. She admitted it under oath in a separate court case. But other than that, it's an argument that you can make. You will get a decision, yay or nay, on the merits, but the decision is going to be nay because proving agency bias is different than the question of whether the agency is biased. Which I'm not saying they are very often, but that's a different question than can you prove it? And the GAO requires the equivalent of the smoking gun type evidence to show bias. So that's an argument that can be made. And so I would say it's usually arguments about adhering to the terms of the solicitation or the underlying law, and sometimes arguments about whether the protester was essentially treated differently than other awardees. Those are some of the main, or the awardee. And Nicole may have some others that she's familiar with that we want to throw in there as kind of common arguments as well.
Yeah, and Nicole, if you can maybe share some of what you've seen. And Stephen, what year did you retire, by the way?
I think my last protest I would have filed would have been sometime in 21, 22, something like
Okay.
that. So, yeah.
So I was going to ask Nicole, what has been some of the common protests that she's seen since Stevens retired? Because there's been a lot of things that has
Yeah.
happened out there since then. You've got the revolutionary fire overhaul. You've got potentially conflicting regulations. You've got all the things that are happening within the 8A realm right now. So
Right.
you want to talk about some of those, Nicole?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, and again, naturally, Steve really hit I think the most common ones that we see really kind of hit those on the head. And there's a lot of more interesting ideas that I've gotten and suggested against protesting, but one I don't think he touched on, but actually see quite often is the scenario where a agency says we did not get your proposal at all, or we got it after the allowed time. So that's something, I mean, even in scenarios we've always recommended against it, but I've still had some, no, let's try anyways. And the rules on that are extremely strict. Essentially, it is on you, and you could submit that thing 3 hours before it's due. There could be an issue in the technical process of it getting to the CO on time, and it's still most of the time going to be on you. So that's another one I think over the years has always been a tried and true. You're going to see those every once in a while, almost always denied. And as
Yeah,
Steve said,
a
go ahead.
quick
Yeah.
tip on that for contractors is like
Yes.
try to get it done submitted the day before, give yourself a full day. Because I've seen also so many things where it's like somebody went in, the system is down or something happens, Murphy's law. And the
Right.
more you wait till that like last minute, the more Murphy's law can like really result in a bad outcome after you've worked so hard to put that together.
So
And
true.
Nicole
And
can't do too much for you at that point.
truly, truly cannot. And another just like good piece of advice on that is that really doing your due diligence to confirm. I think there have been I'm not sure if it was a victory or just a corrective action or something, but there have been some scenarios where a contractor has sent a proposal, asked for confirmation of receipt. It's been confirmed received, and then turned out later there was some issue opening the attachment or the link or something like that. And actually, I think at least in one case, I've seen GAO take some pity on the protester and say, well, they did their due diligence. They had it in on time by a long shot, and really just asking for confirmation of receipt and that all the attachments you can be opened or links are available. Asking them if they generally can't tell you and won't tell you if it's a complete proposal, but you can always try. Hey, could you please confirm that you got all 3 required volumes and everything is working? And, it never hurts. And the more that you stay on them, there's a lot of situations where they won't respond and tell you that they got it or didn't get it. But if you send 10 different emails and continue trying to find ways to get that to them, your chances, even if they don't get it, of having a chance at successful protest are just going to go up exponentially in that. There's also some little known exceptions in the FAR that have to do with if you were to send or drop off a physical copy a certain amount of days prior, that can actually be kind of one of the few, and it doesn't really make sense to me as an exception, but that's how it's framed. So, another, if you have it done 3 days early and you've been having email issues, to be safe, do the old fashioned snail mail and send that way as well. Couple good tips. I'm glad that you elaborate on that one a little bit. And I forgot the underlying question though
Well,
before
the other
that.
one was like, what are the most recent ones, maybe
Oh
since
yeah, some of
Stevens
the, yep,
retired? Like, what's
yes,
happening today? Like, maybe let's
yes,
just talk 2025 and 2026 because a lot's happened in the
yeah.
last year.
Sure has.
Yeah.
So we've definitely seen plenty of people taking issues with some of the work that maybe was set aside for 8A and is not anymore, having a lot to do with the attacks kind of on the 8A program. And that's an interesting one because I've yet to see whether the once 8A, always 8A rule is really still being honored or carries the same bite that it used to. There used to be pretty strict rules against removing work from the 8A program. And I will say, I think we've done one letter that we haven't heard back on, but we haven't really done anything all the way to fruition as far as protesting that. But I've definitely heard people wanting to make, arguments and both sides. I've had
Yeah.
several contractors come say, look, if they're saying yeah, the 8A program is unconstitutional and all this stuff, then I want to protest that this work is still 8A. It shouldn't be. Naturally, as of now, I'm going to say that we're not going to waste your money on that protest because we're going to have to see how things play out. There's a lot of discretion for the agency. And as the rules currently stand, the regulations, at least, they are in favor of work staying in the 8A program. That's something I see quite a bit of just issues with that I think at some point we're going to have some good decisions come down from COFC and GAO that are going to direct us a bit more because we're really kind of unsure. I know the SBA held on to the rule of two generally when it reissued some regulations of late, and we were really unsure whether that was going to stick around or not. But hard to tell kind of how many teeth are still in the bite of those types of things. So I would say that's a really big one. Bias, again, another thing that just over the years, they are almost never successful, but I would say at least once or twice a year, no matter what, I get somebody that is just really fired up. This CO hates me, and I think maybe I've seen a bit of an increase in that in the last couple of years. And I'm actually wondering if that doesn't also have a little something to do with like Ultima and the fact that people are being heard more clearly for these ideas that they are being prejudiced or there's prejudice, being conducted against them. So a lot of those are things I just think have kind of picked up in recent years. And as Steve noted, those are just so hard to win. The amount of times I've had to talk a client off the ledge of the bad faith and bias and say, no, we're going to say unreasonable, improper, unequal. Those are the key words there. I literally had a case with a text message from a CO saying, I dislike a certain kind of people and don't want to award to those people, and still lost the case. So as Steve said, smoking gun is really just the only thing that works
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I think that maybe the increase in kind of the emotional
Mm.
protest is the best way to put that, is
Yeah.
what I've seen. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about defending protests as well, but before I get to that, I want to finish along this kind of line while we're on post-award, pre-award protest. Are there any other kinds of protests outside of that? I mean, uh,
Um, I did
d
mention oh, go ahead. Sorry.
what would it be called if a contractor noticed that there was a competitor of theirs that maybe they were unusually reliant upon a large business that's kind of a competitor? Uh, do they have any rights to protest like a size without there being an actual solicitation or opportunity around it?
That's $1 million question,
I'm
Carol. Really,
just
really,
curious,
truly is.
because
No, it is.
uh,
And I think the lack of real, true, good, hard path forward to do that is a huge issue. I really do. Something that's been driving me nuts is I'm spending so much time helping people that are just being audited just because they're in the 8A program or have an 8A contract. While on the other hand, I'm spending so much time trying to help bring attention to clearly fraudulent behaviors. And boy, we can't get anyone to pay attention to us
mhm,
left and right.
yeah.
So I've tried, man, have I tried. But for the most part, I think just to back it up a little bit, you're correct that you really do need an active solicitation, an active award to protest someone's size or status, and that would be an SBA protest.
Mhm,
But there's a couple things you can do. They're just, again, not the same guaranteed opportunity to be heard. I have personally tried reaching out to SBA, especially in a scenario, a good example of one. We had protested an award. The award got canceled, corrective action got taken, and there was a couple corrective actions. So we kind of were like, yeah, here we go again, but it's probably going to be the same problem. We knew that this group, actually a scenario just like you brought up, where we have a very unusually reliant prime relying on the sub. The sub is doing primary and vital. In fact, we did the math on this one, and there was literally no physical way for 50% of the money to stay with the prime in this scenario. It was an SDVOSB set aside. We actually reached out to SBA. Will usually let you know. They'll send you a message. Usually, we have not heard from
yeah.
OHA in months. To be honest with you, we've got stuff that's been out there for months, and we've not even
Mm,
had acknowledgement. But SBA will usually reach out and say, hey, we heard there was a corrective action. We're gonna stay or dismiss your size or status protest. I have come up with some very, very just policy driven, strong responses where we've said we really, really prefer you don't. In this scenario, we know that this contracting group is actually performing 5 other contracts for this work with this team. We know it's illegal. We really urge you to look into it. And nothing. They've still dismissed in every case that I've been a part of. You do have the ability to reach out to like the Office of Inspector General. In that scenario, if you aren't kind of, if it's not, this was a situation where we had tried to notify the CO, just the CO themselves, and they were not very receptive to it. But if that's not the case, bringing it to the CO's attention is never going to hurt. We've done just some very good letters, and a lot of people don't realize this, but the whistleblower laws out there actually talk about how reporting to a contracting officer is actually one of the authorized recipients of your kind of claim of fraud or gross mismanagement of a contract, or all those types of things. So you can take it directly to a CO. Hey, this person bid. We realize there's not an active award. If you give them it, we are going to have to go to SBA for sure. But, here's some concerns we want to bring your attention. Sending those to the OIG is also a good idea. And then we were talking a little bit earlier about Court of Federal Claims and how so many more. I used to recommend Court of Federal Claims every once in a while, where for whatever reason the jurisprudence was maybe a bit better there, or I just thought it was the type of case where maybe we wanted to be able to bring in more information than GAO's more limited jurisdiction allows. But I am now very much, that's kind of my go-to for the protests I actually really see teeth with. And, I think that's a lot of things are shifting that way. I bring that up because in this scenario, this make-believe scenario that I've been talking about, we go, let's say, repetitively to GAO, to SBA, trying to bring attention. There's not an active award. Well, I can tell you, this was an idea I had, which is, why don't we just try to file something at COFC? Your ability to file at COFC, because the timeframes are generally longer. They're not longer for pre-award terms of the solicitation, but they're generally longer for everything else. So I had the idea of, why don't we protest a failed corrective action? That is something you can protest. Don't typically recommend it. Here, we really just wanted someone's attention. File the notice, get a call from DOJ, talk to DOJ, and then according to that DOJ individual, they had notified SBA. They had notified people within the agency. So that was, but it's so hard to get someone's attention on those without being able to take advantage of the actual protest rights, is the point of the long story here. But if you have a scenario like that, finding us or another attorney to help you out, don't think there is no path forward. It's just a much harder path forward to try to get someone's attention. And I do hope, with the moves toward efficiency and this attack on fraudulent companies and contracting and all that stuff, I would love to see a clearer path forward for people to actually blow the whistle on things like this, because the rights are out there, but the process is not really anything set in stone.
Yeah, great. While you mentioned timelines, let's talk about that, because there are critical timelines that must be met. So what advice would you give to somebody when they think, oh, this may be an issue that I need to look into a protest? What do they need to know about the timelines?
Yeah. I think the first and foremost, most important thing is just reaching out before you even know if you want to protest. And I think there's kind of a misconception that once you engage an attorney, you're paying some flat, and I can't speak for other attorneys, but I'll speak for my firm. Pretty smart guy started my firm, and we've got some pretty good policies in place. So, some firms may have flat fees and things like that. We do not, and it's generally not a good idea. We also don't do like the contingent thing where, we get paid if you win, so we're not going to take your case. Nothing like that. So if you even have the thought of something feeling unfair, immediately reaching out to talk to someone. I've had plenty of cases where someone has come to me with an issue. I have looked for no more than an hour or two at the question, at the solicitation, maybe the proposal if it's a post award, and I do need to be engaged as your attorney to give you this advice, because there's plenty of situations out there where someone has said, I don't think you have a case. Turns out later they maybe did and they lost their right. So that attorney gets in trouble. So I can't just, send it over and I'll tell you before we engage. The engagement process is nothing big. And I would say most firms work this way. Just engage an attorney, have them take a quick look. Feel free to tell them, I don't want you to spend more than a couple hours on this. For the most part, a good attorney is not going to. And making sure you trust that firm, because yes, there are some firms out there that are protest happy and maybe don't have the amount of clients or work that we do and are wanting you to protest just so they get the work. Never going to be us. We have plenty of clients, plenty of work. So I will be very honest. In fact, we tell a lot of clients we do not think they have a great shot at protest, even where something seems unreasonable or unfair. And that's not us being Debbie Downers. There's plenty of case law out there where even GAO has said, we maybe agree this wasn't the right decision. We wouldn't have made the same decision, but we still see a reasonable path from how the agency got to its decision. So even though we're sorry, we agree, it's not something we can help with. CUFC, same type of thing. Sometimes it's jurisdiction. Sometimes it's very often it's that interested party status and being able to show that you would have been in line for the award and things like that. So I would say that just going really, really early to talk, because I know Steve had this happen. We all have this happen all the time. Even where maybe there is a good post-award argument, they come to us and it is somehow tied to something they had issue with in the initial solicitation. Very common one is, well, yeah, but the initial solicitation was written in favor of this party anyways. They just got the award. I want to protest. Well, we can protest some of that, but we cannot go in and say that it's unequally weighted now because you lost that right. So going to an attorney just right off the bat and knowing that, trusting them to tell you no if they don't think it's a good idea. I still have clients all the time say, yeah, well, we want to go for it anyways. As long as it's not frivolous, let's do it. Definitely have that happen. But I think reaching out early is by far the best thing. When it comes to those post-award protests, you've got 10 days really from when you knew or should have known. And then you also have the 5 days if you want to get the stay of performance, which is pretty much, to be honest, one of the only reasons I still recommend GAO is that guaranteed stay of performance. So don't wait until it's 4 days out to reach out. It seems like a short time frame. Those 4 days are magical gold to us as attorneys to get something down for you. So
awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Steven?
Yeah, I mean, what Nicole said is absolutely right. I mean, I've had cases where people reached out to me and 10 minutes into our exploratory call, we realized that they'd already missed the deadline because they'd been kind of waiting on this protest. And the deadlines are going to vary based on, are you going to Court of Federal Claims? Are you going to GAO? Is it pre-award? Is it post-award? Are you aiming for an automatic stay? If so, did you get a debriefing? Did you not get a debriefing? There's a lot of nuances even to what the deadline is. If you're going for a NAICS code appeal, that's different than a pre-award protest of a different type of issue, for example. So even though it sounds silly, relying on experts to even help you understand what the deadlines are is really important, because there's so many folks that I've talked to who may have had a viable protest argument, but by the time they reached out, they'd already missed the deadline because they didn't understand what the deadlines were for that particular case. And so the deadlines for these things are strict. They're very strict. And so, we were just talking offline about a case at GAO that kind of just came out. The decision was published yesterday. And this is a case in which the protester assumed that its deadline to file what's called comments on the agency report, which is part of the protest process at GAO, it's mandatory for the protester to do that within 10 days of receiving the agency report. Protester assumed that deadline would be extended because there was a government-wide snow day in the Washington, D.C. area, and GAO's physical office was closed. And so the protester waited until the next day when GAO's physical office was open to file its comments on the agency report. However, GAO does not take filings physically. It takes them through its EPDS electronic protest docketing system. And GAO said, well, our EPDS is up and running. And in fact, government-wide, it was a telework day. I mean, just because we were open for business online, and even pointed out that other folks who had been in a similar situation reached out to GAO to ask whether they, whether that day still would count or whether it would be an extension, but this protester had not. And so the protester filed a day late, and what happened? The protest got dismissed, and the protester came back and tried to make all sorts of arguments as to why that wasn't fair, and GAO said, kind of, we don't care. I mean, it said it in a very polite polite ways, but like that's on you. And so these deadlines are strict, and you can't rely on the fact that GAO is going to have any sympathy for you. They're going to waive a deadline. They're going to extend one. And the same holds true with the Court of Federal Claims and an SBA. And so, when in doubt, you gotta aim to file on the early side. Always file on the early side, both in turn as it applies to delivering your proposal to the agency, but the same applies to protest too. Because if something gets gummed up, you miss one of these deadlines, even if it's by a few minutes. I've seen a case that literally went down to the question of if you filed with 30 seconds past the number, the deadline number, does that count? And in that case, I believe GAO had sympathy and said, yeah, we'll give you the 30 seconds, we'll round that down, but if it'd been a minute late, then no. So you got to be really, really careful with these deadlines. They're interpreted strictly, they're applied strictly. A lot of cases get dismissed because folks missed the deadline by a day, an hour, a few minutes.
Yeah. And same goes for, submitting your solicitations. I mean, these systems have timestamps on them, so they're documenting when they receive these files for this specific purpose. So Nicole, we don't have to spend a lot of time on defending protests, but I would just say, if a contractor, all of a sudden they win an award, they're all excited that they find out that there's a protest being made on that award. I guess the same, guidance would apply. Just reach out as soon as possible so that you guys could get involved, understand what's going on, and maybe make a recommendation to their best course of action.
Yeah, absolutely. And great point. As soon as possible. And kind of that same, don't be under the impression that you're automatically going to be spending a ton of money by doing so, because I've had plenty of cases where a current client or new client reaches out to me. I got protested. It's beneficial to have your attorney get involved, and it's called intervene. So intervene on your behalf. You become the intervener for, even if for no reason other than most of the time there's a protective order in place. You as a non-attorney are not going to be able to see what's going on. You're going to be in the dark. Having someone representing your rights in the know that's reading these things is absolutely invaluable here. And I have very often recommended we not do a thing. I read things, I stay in the know. I say, I don't see this protest succeeding in any circumstance. We're not going to draft anything. There's then what we typically are going to look at first thing is the minute we have someone engage us to intervene, we go intervene. As soon as we are approved to be under the protective order, the first thing we're going to look at is it timely? Do they have jurisdiction, interested party status? Those are the big questions, because agencies will, for the most part, do a really good job of picking those things out. But it is the random occasion where you can just right off the bat see this is 11 days after, this is not 10 days. There's no reason not to draft up a quick request for dismissal. Also, a lot of people are under the impression you really can't work with the agency, and that is also very much not true. Most of the time when we intervene, I reach out to the agency right off the bat and just say, we're intervening. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help. Depending on how badly you want that award, I've had clients say, offer to draft the request for dismissal, see if the agency has any ideas or wants to work with you or wants you to draft it, or ask the agency, are you already planning to file a request for dismissal? Good to know those things so you don't duplicate work. And most of the time, as soon as one is filed, let's say I file a request for dismissal, the agency and the protester would typically have a right to comment on it, and vice versa. Even if the agency files one, GAO typically says intervener and protester need to respond within 2 days or whatever. So you'll usually get to give that input, and working with the agency is just a really good idea. But yeah, could be that we don't help at all. Could be that we immediately get involved. We draft requests for dismissal. We give our input on comments. We're very involved the whole time, but no reason not to at least have somebody take a look for you and keep you in the know of what's going on.
Yeah, awesome. So I wanted to also move to one other topic, which is AI.
Just really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
I just wanted to add a couple things, just very quickly, what Nicole said on the defending the protest, just because I think it's important for people to know. So the first thing first is we've been talking mostly about bid protest, GAO, Court of Federal Claims, but it is important for folks to know that if your size or status gets protested at SBA, that's not an optional intervention. You have to wait and defend those protests, or you lose the protest. If the
Great
size and status protest at SBA, you as the protested company actually have the burden of proving your case. You have to prove that you're a small business, not the other way around. And so keep that in mind as well. At GAO and Court of Federal Claims, bid protest, it's optional to intervene. I told my clients, though, a couple things. Like, number one, you don't know whether the agency is going to assign the A team to defend that protest or the C team, until you get in there. And so, as Nicole said, you may just sit there and monitor. They're doing a great job. Or you may sort of need to come in and pick up some of that weight for them, because they may not put their best attorneys on the case, or those attorneys may be really overworked at the moment. They can't give that case the attention it's due. Bottom line with intervention, even though it's optional, no matter how much an agency likes you, they never care as much as you do that you're the awardee of that contract. You care the most. And so having somebody who's there to advocate for you, whether that's just kind of monitoring things or whether it's more aggressively picking up, doing, as Nicole said, motions to dismiss and such, as the agency may not be that aggressive, or they may be overworked, or they may not have their best counsel on that case, can only help you. So that's just a couple things I want to quickly add on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. One of the things I also want to add here is that I know that there's probably a good number of people here who are clients of Apex Accelerators. We probably have some Apex Accelerator counselors, program managers with us today. But this is one area that Apex Accelerators are expressly prohibited from assisting clients with, which is protest. So if you need some help with the protest, again, we just talked about those critical timelines. I think it's important that you reach out to the help as soon as possible. So with that, I wanted to have one last topic discussion. I know Stephen is going to like this one. He's been blogging about it a couple of times, but that is AI usage inside of protest. And so, Nicole, you probably have seen some of this as well, but with the rise of the AI tools, contractors and some attorneys are increasingly using this technology to basically, analyze solicitations, draft protest arguments. Can you talk about what you've seen out there, and what are some of the opportunities, and also what are the risks and mistakes that can occur in this new world that we live in when it comes to AI?
Yeah, so I guess I can start there. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not anti-AI by any way, shape, or form. I use AI in limited context myself. That said, I think what we're seeing now in the bid protest world is mostly non-attorneys. You can represent yourself as a non-attorney at GAO. You can't do that at the Court of Federal Claims. And some attorneys, too, who are not using AI in a responsible way. And by that, I mean, AI is a wonderful tool. It's not a lawyer. It's not ChatGPT, Esquire. I mean, it is there to be a helpful tool, but AI is a tool. It's not an expert. It's not an attorney. And so what happens, and has happened in a number of GAO cases now, and bid protest cases, is that somebody, typically a non-attorney, although a few attorneys have done this too, which is actually an ethical problem potentially under their state bars, they have used AI to draft a protest, and there's nothing in the GAO's rules that prohibits that, and I'm not telling you not to do it. But what's happened is that the AI has done a bunch of hallucinations, and that's the polite way of saying the AI just made up a bunch of stuff. And so the AI made up cases that don't exist, or it cited real cases for principles that they don't stand for. It gave the person what they wanted to see, which is a nice brief that supported their case, but it was wrong. And so when the GAO went in to look at that brief, and it's like, well, that case sounds pretty good, but it doesn't exist. We don't remember ever saying this in that other case. Oh, we didn't say it. Then the protester ends up with egg on its face. And so GAO has said, look, everybody who files at GAO, we're not saying you can't use AI. That would be kind of ridiculous. It's a fair tool to use. But we are saying that you have an obligation to make sure that every citation that you're submitting to us is true and accurate. And so if you're someone who's going to go through and use AI to do your brief, first of all, I would caution you against doing that, because AI, again, could be used as a tool to help you draft a protest, but it does not have the expertise of someone like Nicole, who can really help you with the strategy of how to approach these cases. But if you do that, or if your attorney does that, make sure that you are going through and looking at each individual citation with a human eyes and making sure that it's accurate. Otherwise, you could get your case potentially dismissed for having false citations in your case. And the other thing that AI is doing is it's citing like nice quotes out of cases that sound good. But when you look at the result of the case, the protester lost, for example. So it doesn't really help. So they're like, well, that's great. You have this nice one sentence that you cherry pick from the case, but the case shouldn't have been cited because it went the other way. It was supported the agency, for example, in the protest scenario. So you got to be really careful in how you're using AI, using it responsibly in the protest context. The last thing I would say, because we have seen a couple attorneys who have gotten their hands caught in the cookie jar, who have apparently been using AI to do the same thing, to draft their brief, submit it without checking the sites, which again, I think, I'm not an expert in this field, but I think could be an ethical problem for under the state attorney ethics rules. Who, if I'm the client hiring an attorney these days, whether it's in the GAO protest context or some other context, I want to ask that attorney, how are you using AI in my representation, and be comfortable with that answer. How are you going to use AI? If you're using AI to draft a brief, I assume, one, I'm going to get that reflected in my bill. It's going to be a lower bill because you're not spending the same amount of time doing it. But two, I want to be sure that you're making, using human verification of everything that appears in that brief. And that you're ultimately using your own judgment and your own knowledge to direct the strategy of this case, even if you're using a tool to help do some of the nuts and bolts drafting of a brief, for example. So I would want to have that conversation with an attorney as part of the engagement process if I was the client these days.
Yeah, Nicole, you have anything to add to AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stephen nailed it, and I've actually been an avid reader of a lot of his blogs on AI. I took a CLE on AI in the law the other day, and you probably saw my reaction, but the biggest takeaway, I think, from that, because big fan of ChatGPT, not gonna lie. I think I really used it for the first time for work, though, ever last week. And I very openly told the client, I actually went to ChatGPT with this question. The key is that's where you start. That is not where you finish the analysis.
Yeah.
It was a question where there's not a direct law on point. Seems like there should be. Intuitively, we all kind of like, wow, there's got to be something we can use to support this point that we're trying to make or this action. And you know what? I'm going to go to ChatGPT. So I went to ChatGPT, asked the questions. Naturally, it starts shooting out big, bold statements, some of which just confirm my gut feeling, but you absolutely use that as a starting point. I essentially printed that out, circled the parts I wanted more info on, and went as far as to say where most of the time it would say this kind of comes from this law or this case, but what is the source of this one? Left and right, what is the source of this? You then go to that source, find the language. Do not, even if it's quoted in ChatGPT, do not trust it. As Steve said, it's not that it's going to try to lie to you or anything, but it could have pulled that from a horribly losing case. That could have been an argument. Yeah, that language is in there, but they said no to it.
Yeah.
So you go that's where you use your Westlaw, your Lexis, whatever it is, what your job, what you're supposed to do. That's where you pull those cases directly, find the language directly, go to the law, find the law, make sure it's still in place, because again, ChatGPT may not know that something just changed or was updated, or if it does, it may not care. It may be saying, yeah, I found the language you wanted, here it is. Didn't tell you that it's from something not applicable. So I think the biggest takeaway is it's okay to use it, being very honest about it with the client. And I told the client straight up, I got some of the answers from that I wanted. There's one of them that I could not find a source for anywhere, but this is ChatGPT's opinion. It said this. The things I did find, here they are. Those are the only ones I'm personally going to rely on. So I think it's a great starting point, especially for some of the more nuanced, there's just definitely not a law that speaks directly to this or anything like that. So for that reason, I think you want to double check everything, be upfront with the client that you used it, what you used it for. It could be incredibly helpful. I think everybody, the CLE takeaway is most of the cases where someone got in trouble, it was because they used ChatGPT, and that is where the work ended. They used it, they turned it in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No,
Yeah. It's not that you can't use it, it's that you have to use it responsibly.
Absolutely. Right. And the same holds true for those of you guys who may be using it for proposal writing, and
absolutely,
you can't just expect, it's not the easy button,
no.
Right. And I think that's what people want. People want, let's take the solicitation put it in there and have it spit out a proposal. And people are doing this. Actually, submit.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think the
they are,
only
and that's why you're seeing so many more of these oral evaluations. I think these days, where there's an oral
Yeah,
evaluation factor,
yeah,
further
and
yeah.
the other thing I think you need to be really careful about is, I mean, one of the reasons that we are very limited in how we use it, uh, we don't know how safe it. We don't know protections. If you're going to be putting all your very important pricing information into ChatGPT,
Yeah.
you may want to think about the fact that
Hmm.
you're not guaranteed that the next person that asks ChatGPT that question, they don't say, "Here's another proposal that was just submitted and it was great. It won. You should use this." I don't see anything that says they can't do that. I mean, I've seen a lot of law firms start incorporating ChatGPT into things like organizing their files. And we've thought about, man, it would be so nice if I could say, find me a joint venture that was successful where the managing venture was a WSB and here's the solicitation and find one that fits this exactly. Gosh, yeah, it could be really helpful. But at the same time, we have the protective orders, client confidentiality. We have several things we have to be very careful about. And that's another thing to think about both for contractors and
Yeah,
attorneys. It's a
yeah,
great tool, but there are limits still.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to be doing a lot of courses this year on AI and Gavology. So
Awesome.
we're shooting to
Awesome.
have one once a month because there's just so many things that that you got to take into consideration with
Totally.
all of this. Just like you mentioned, I mean, we don't have to go on any more about that, but because we could get into another hour discussion. But
Yeah.
let's go ahead and segue into our Q&A here. And again,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Nicole, for being a guest with us today. And thank you for, your firm partnering with us to support the work that we're doing on this show. I didn't say this at the beginning, but, in addition to working with Stephen for more than probably 12 to 14 years before we even launched Gavology, we were doing some things with Steven, and Steven's been really great. And Nicole has also been my personal attorney when I've had some things that I wanted or needed to reach out to them on. So anyway, I'm very grateful to both of you guys for being here today for this topic. I've got Nicole's contact information there on the screen. I'll leave that up through the Q&A. And we do have some questions in the queue that we're going to go to. But before we do, Stephen and Nicole, is there anything else you guys might want to mention out there that we didn't touch on today?
You can go first, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to close the loop on what Nicole said there with AI, and you hit on it as well, Carol. Be very careful with respect to legal matters and AI. Understand the terms of service of your AI and how they're using that information, how they're storing it. Are they using it to train their AI models? Are they going to potentially disclose that? There was a case that arose in another context in New York recently, in which the client entered legal information into an AI, and then it was, the judge found that that information was not protected by some sort of attorney-client privilege or
Mm,
work product privilege, and the other side could get that information because, well, AI isn't a lawyer, and the terms of service of the AI model that this person was using made it pretty clear that that information was not going to be kept confidential. It was, open for use for other purposes. So just be very careful about that. It's a rapidly evolving area of law, and that applies to the bid protest context, but just to any context in which you may be tempted to use AI in your legal world or with any information you deem confidential. That understand that what the terms are of that, and if there's something that you want to have protected from public disclosure, be certain that that is going to happen before you start inputting that stuff into an AI.
Yeah.
all
Great
right.
points. Yep.
All right.
And only thing I wanted to add is, you know, keeping yourself knowledgeable and up to date on all these things in the very
Hmm.
rapidly changing landscape is just so, so, so crucial. And, naturally, I'm here as an attorney to help when you do need direct legal advice. But really, like, cannot suggest with more urgency than I can right now that following Gavology, being a part of these presentations, so, so, so beneficial. We've got a blog also, the Small GovCon blog.
Yes.
We try to stay very, very up to date on the happenings. And keep in mind, that's not just like, how did the law change? It's how did the law change and maybe how did it get interpreted by the
Yeah.
court? And that's something that's absolutely free. So please, please
Yeah.
subscribe to that. Keeping yourself in the know through Govology, through my blog and other legal blogs. It's just the best advice I can give to any brand new contractors, experienced contractors. And I know both Govology and my blog do a good job of kind of, we have some very basic stuff for those just starting out. We also have some very complex stuff for those wanting to dig deeper into some of the legal and just general federal contracting happenings out there. So
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that the smallgovcon.com blog. So this is a really great blog, and it's been a go-to for one of the go-to places for me as well when I'm like, what was that thing on
oh yeah,
SDVOSB? So, in
me
addition
too.
to just getting a good feed of information periodically, and by the way, thank you guys for and both you and Stephen as well for publishing some of your articles in the Govology Nation LinkedIn group. Um, but just kind of going through there, there's that little search box on the smallgovcon.com blog, and that's very helpful for because I can go in there. It's like SDVOSB. I can see all the things that have kind of you guys have written about as it related to changes that have happened with the SDVOSB or something like that, So that little feature right there is also a really helpful feature for,
Love,
just a little
love it.
tip for everybody. So,
Yeah,
all right,
love the
so
search
let's
bar.
yes, me too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let's
Steve to
head
thank
into
for that one. So
yeah, great blog, great blog.
yes, yes.
Um, let's head into the questions here today. And by the way, somebody said that they couldn't see the slides. So this is not your traditional webinar. This is our GovCon Roundup live show. But you should now see a slide that's got contact information for Nicole. Feel free to reach out to her if you guys have any other questions or if you just don't want to take something here, through the open forum. If you need to talk about something private, make sure you go that way. And also, I will just say this, in some of these questions that we get sometimes, there might be the guidance that let's take this offline because it can be so specific about one specific company that it just needs to be taken offline. So that said, let's jump right in. The first question is, how do you protest unsolicited proposals? And they said, let's say DOE. So I guess they use DOE as an example, but I guess that's a question. Like, can you protest
Like a
it?
sole source? Is that kind of the
Yeah,
question
I
you mean?
don't
Yeah.
know. They didn't give more information about that,
Yeah.
but
I mean, I don't know that there is a route to protest it. I've never tried to protest one, but it is by nature an unsolicited proposal. So there's no solicitation. You could be counter, you can't, they can't evaluate you contrary to a solicitation because there is no solicitation.
yeah,
And there's, you could try to get some argument, I guess, about how it was arbitrary and unreasonable not to accept your unsolicited proposal, but I don't know that that would go anywhere. That would be one I don't know that I've ever done that before. And I don't know, I'd have to research it to determine the answer, but I would be skeptical that you'd have much of a protest argument, just a gut reaction for an unsolicited proposal, given that the agency it is unsolicited, and so the failure to accept your unsolicited proposal it seems to me maybe a stretch that would be a viable protest argument.
I'd say maybe in the circumstance where, let's say you send a proposal and you're wanting maybe a direct award and the direct award doesn't happen and someone else gets a direct award, or maybe it then gets solicited. There's always the chance, I think, potentially of raising a protest kind of later on of the addition of the award or of the decision to compete the award or of a sole source award to someone else and saying, I offered something better. I think this award is unreasonable, but again, not something I've done. And assuming that's what you mean, if you're talking more about someone else's unsolicited proposal, maybe a sole source scenario, don't see this is a question actually. Don't most sole source or direct awards, they do end up with some kind of solicitation document though, right? Even if it just goes to the awardee most of the time.
Yeah, there should be. From a lot of them, they're going to have to
That's
post something on SAM that says,
right.
"Hey,
At
we
least
did this
about the award.
award."
Yeah.
Over a certain dollar threshold. I think that may have got increased recently with
Yeah.
the inflationary adjustments, but over a certain dollar threshold, they've got to post essentially, and oftentimes a notification or a J&A,
Yeah, J&A if
for
it's
that
necessary.
that sole source award, so that there's a public record of that, and then you may be able to protest that, as you said, saying, "Hey,
precisely.
you said this company was the only qualified source, but we submitted an unsolicited proposal for the same thing 6 months ago. You knew about us, so what's the deal?" Like, that might be a situation where you could use that unsolicited proposal to support a protest. But again, it will be very fact specific. I think Nicole raised some good scenarios where perhaps it'd be worth a conversation.
All right. Next question. I am fortunate that I win 47% of proposals I submit. However, for the other 53%, I always go back to our partner and ask how we could have competed more successfully. About once a month, an OEM will say there's no way the government got what they wanted for that price. Typically, these are 25K to 200K deals, and for the amount of markup we would make, doesn't make economic sense to protest. The OEM likely stands to make more dollars than our firm and SDVOSB. Could they protest? When, if ever, might it make sense for us to protest if we were just making 5 to 10% markup on these deals?
Yeah, well, I guess I can start with that and let Nicole jump in. And we can't obviously give you personal advice as to when it might make sense for you personally to protest, but I can answer that kind of from a bigger picture perspective. And so, one thing that folks sometimes come in and say they try to protest is essentially the other guy's price was too low. The other guy's price is too low. It's really what's called a price realism argument. In other words, is this company's price realistic to do the work that is set forth in the solicitation? In many cases, that's not going to be a viable argument. That's where you need to talk to somebody like Nicole, because a lot of times in a fixed price setting, unless the solicitation specifically calls for a price realism evaluation, then the government is not only they're essentially not allowed to evaluate price realism. And so because the GAO's position in the Court of Federal Claims position is that there may be viable business reasons for a company to submit a below cost offer.
Yeah.
They may want to do that to get their foot in the door at that agency, for example, build a record of past performance. And so they're playing the long game. And so, you're going to want to look at the solicitation then and say, hey, does it call for a price realism evaluation if we're talking fixed price here? If so, and you it said you had to evaluate price realism and the other guy's price really is too low, you may have a protest argument. But a lot of times you see these protests filed where they're saying, yeah, that guy can't make a profit on that thing. That's an unrealistically low price. And yet it's a fixed price solicitation. There's no realism analysis called for under the evaluation factors. That's a protest that you shouldn't have filed. And that, because there's no chance of winning that thing. We see those ones lose all the time. So that's kind of my big picture 2 cents. Again, we can't, at least I can, I'm sure Nicole can't in this setting, give you specific advice as to when you personally should protest. That's an offline type conversation. That's just kind of my 2 cents from a higher level.
Yeah, that's precisely what I would have said. Again, if there is good language in the solicitation, which, an attorney can tell you pretty quickly, it doesn't have to say we are doing price realism, but that's going to be your best bet. But it could say something along the lines of, we're going to be evaluating low prices to make sure that they demonstrate an understanding of solicitation requirements, something along those lines. Those are still more difficult to win than just a flat out price realism language, but they could give you a little more of a window. The only other things I wanted to add were, first and foremost, be very careful that if your firm is an SDVOSB and you're talking about, what you may make on these, and I assume we're just talking, markup, and it's not like total value or anything, but make sure that you're abiding by the limitation on subcontracting or the non-manufacturer rule in all of these cases without a doubt. But as long as you are, I absolutely have seen scenarios where clients have come to me as the sub saying, just based on the nature of their business, our business, the work they have, the work we have, this is a bigger deal to us than it is to the prime contractor. Not getting this means much more to my business than it does to them. And in those scenarios, keep in mind, I have to bill my client directly, but what my client does to pay that invoice It's really none of my business. So I've seen scenarios where we help a joint venture. We may maybe represent one of the client or one of the ventures, the managing venture generally is the only time I'll take kind of joint venture work for a client, where they then divide the invoice up however it is they want to. So it could be a scenario where you, as the prime, because you're spot on, a subcontractor is not going to be able to go protest. They weren't the bidder, but a sub can absolutely get involved in a prime's protest, can help with it. I've had situations where the subcontractor has a lawyer. I'm the lawyer of the prime. We work together. They each pay us, but we work together on something. Or again, as long as everybody understands the bounds of who it is I represent, whose interests I am looking out for, because you always have to keep in mind at the end of some of these things, there could be a scenario where there is some dispute, even if everyone's getting along perfectly well in the beginning, there could end up being some kind of dispute. We always go through these kind of things when we're doing conflict evaluations and having conflict waivers out there. But as long as all that's abundantly clear, I've also seen scenarios where I bill the sub actually ends up paying the prime some of the money. I would have cautioned that much more strongly back in the day to be sure we're not looking like there is a potential affiliation, ostensible subcontractor scenario. But I will say under the new rules that say basically as long as you're following the limitation on subcontracting for most contract, that's a defense, they're less concerned about things like that. For the most part, still want to be sure your sub is not the one in control. They're not taking more money than they should or anything like that. But and an OEM can be a sub, vendor can be a sub under SBA's very broad definition of a sub. So they can be a part of your protest, even if they cannot protest directly. They can help you pay for it. There's things like that. So probably worth it in a scenario like that. If you've got that good language and a protest is worthwhile, to sit down and have a conversation about, like, if you have so much to gain from this, let's consider splitting some of these costs up.
Yeah, great. So the next question is, can you discuss pre/post-award protests based on the requirement of the contractor needing a facility clearance at the time of submitting their proposal?
Happy to take the lead.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit.
Yeah,
Oh,
go
well,
ahead.
Nicole,
No,
why don't you go ahead
you do
first
it.
on that
You
one?
go ahead, Steve.
and so that is going to be one that in my experience is very fact specific to the scenario in question. And so unless the rules have changed since I was doing these protests years back, the baseline rule was that when a contract required a FCL, that was considered a matter of responsibility generally, and responsibility factors ordinarily need to be satisfied by the date of award and not by the date of bid. And so you still have to have the FCL to do the work under that case, if that's the case, but you don't necessarily have to have it at the time of bid. You'd have to have it at the time of award, which often give you, several months more to go ahead and get that clearance. Now, there are cases though where the agency says, look, we don't want to waste our time. We don't want to evaluate a solicitation in which we're getting a bunch of offers from uncleared companies, and they may or may not get their clearance by the time the award date comes, and then we've just wasted a bunch of time. And so they put something in the solicitation that says you have to have your clearance at the date of bid. And in my understanding, that those restrictions have been upheld. And so I think that it's just going to depend on what the solicitation says. I don't know that there's going to be any avenue to really successfully protest one of those latter ones. In other words, we don't think you should need it at the date of bid. We think that you should only ask for it at the date of award. Nor do I think the GAO or court is likely going to be, in most cases, receptive to an argument that this work doesn't require a clearance. I think they're going to probably just defer to the agency discretion as to whether certain material, the nature of the contract, requires a clearance to be able to perform the work. But that's just my 2 cents from a high level.
Yep, spot on. I agree, spot on with Steve's analysis. But 2 quick points to add. One, just a general, really, really good takeaway from today and talking about protests. We get questions a lot about what Steve just noted, like the FAR says one thing, or maybe the courts have said one thing about what is required. And we get this a lot with licensing and security stuff and clearance stuff. And then they say, but the agency solicitation says something else. the agency can always, almost always, go above and beyond what the FAR says. As long as it has a need. And Steve explained that. Notice he went through, well, maybe they would need it earlier for this reason because they don't want to waste valuable time. Da, da, da. If the agency itself has a solid written reason for why it has, the baseline is you need something at this date, but the agency wants it sooner. That is generally going to be something that is upheld as allowed by GAO and COFC. What agencies cannot do is say basically go below what the bar is that's set by regulations. So they can't take away something required by the FAR. They can add something to it. They can say, yeah, we understand that under the FAR you'd be fine with this, but we're not. There's a few exceptions to that. And I think one of the big ones we've seen with facility clearance was back in the day, we were always protesting that both joint venture parties had a facility clearance and the agency would say the JV itself needs one. And it just didn't make sense for an unpopulated JV to need one. So since that time, there's been some changes in rules and good case law that now say it is okay. But that is a scenario, again, where if an agency were to come and say, no, 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 the joint venture itself needs a facility clearance, it's not enough that both ventures have it, you'd be able to basically show that's directly contrary. It's not adding on, it's directly contrary to what the rules currently are. So I just wanted to add that as kind of a big picture thing, because I think that's really important to keep in mind. And then also with what Steve said, I think it's in the FAR. I know there's good case law, but I'm pretty sure it's in the FAR as well, that basically says something about if something for sure goes to responsibility, the offerer has a right to submit that to the agency basically up until award, up until any time before award. Now, I've argued that in plenty of scenarios that we didn't win because either maybe it wasn't for sure spot on responsibility, it wasn't perfectly clearly responsibility determination, or because they did come in with some agency discretion as to the agency explained what its needs were and why it needed something above and beyond the baseline. But do keep in mind, you mentioned the pre and the post. So a good pre-award, and I say good as in would be the case here. I'm not saying it would be successful, but pre-award protest here would be the solicitation requires this facility clearance. Let's say it's the joint venture scenario. That's contrary to law. It says the joint venture itself needs one. Law says it's okay that both ventures have it. That would be a decent protest I would absolutely take on for someone. And that would be a pre-award. Do not wait until award is given to go back and take issue with that, as we talked about earlier. Post-award type thing might be that more so, I don't even know it'd be post-award, but maybe they make the award to somebody and you are told the only reason, maybe you're lower priced and better rated, the only reason they got it and you didn't is you got your facility clearance or submitted your facility clearance a couple of days after your proposal. That would potentially be a decent one to take and say, again, it's going to depend on what the solicitation said. It's going to be really fact specific, and I may or may not advise it based on what that solicitation says. But that could be a situation, especially if the solicitation is silent on it, to go in and say, actually, under the FAR, you're supposed to allow me to submit this up until the time of award. So really, this award should have gone to me. But just wanted to kind of flush that out a little bit.
Okay. So we got a few questions left. Do we have time, Nicole and Stephen, for one more?
We could probably do one more quick one. I know Nicole's probably got clients waiting on her.
Yeah.
If she's got to drop off, that's fine. I can give it maybe a couple more minutes, and I
got a few more
another
minutes,
conflict
okay.
as well. But yeah,
okay,
we'll take one more quick.
Perfect.
So here's what we'll do. We have a few questions left. I want to answer quickly 2 of them at the top, but then there's a really good one that I wanted to get through, and maybe we could close out there. So somebody says like brand name or only sole source, often based on very thin justification. Is it worth protesting? I would say reach out to Nicole and ask her. That's one of those kind of probably it depends scenarios. The next question is, what's the general price point for hiring an attorney to represent a contractor during protest? Again, I would just reach out because different attorneys have different pricing points, and it's doesn't cost you, does it, anything to call and ask, Nicole?
Doesn't cost anything to call and ask. You'll get a free 30-minute consultation, and I'm happy to give estimates
All
that
right,
time.
awesome. This is an interesting question. We had a protest against us, and they mostly attacked us as opposed to the agency. After spending a lot of money defending ourselves, the agency requested a rebid. The protester was able to view our original bid, but we couldn't see theirs. we won the rebid, but we lost more than $1 million and they didn't change their bid amount. Seems patently unfair. Any recourse?
Yeah, I mean, I turn that to Nicole really since she's more plugged in with this, but that's one I'd want to investigate more with you. It does seem unfair. We can't give legal advice about a specific scenario, and I'd want to investigate further what was required there. I feel like I've seen those cases before in which, the answer was sort of agency discretion, in which the agency in some cases has equalized things by releasing everybody else's prices, and it's been held to be okay. In some cases hasn't, and it's also been held to be okay. At least that's my sense of it, having not looked at that issue recently. I don't know. What do you think there, Nicole?
Yeah, I would agree. We do have the Procurement Integrity Act that provides protection for basically disclosure of certain information, but that's more the kind of detailed price breakdown and stuff. Generally, agencies will and are even sometimes required to release total bid amounts or get total proposed prices from everybody, and definitely can let everyone know what an awarded price was. But there are protest grounds, and again, you'd want very fact specific, want to talk to an attorney, but protest grounds based on Procurement Integrity Act. I think the important thing there is you kind of need to be able to show like a direct competitive harm. So you couldn't just go say the agency released this and they shouldn't have, because kind of like any protest, you would have to really show, look, the agency released this. As a result, this other protester, this other offer bid lower than me and they got the award. Where you end up with the award, it may be kind of difficult. Again, this is not direct advice to you, but it may be kind of difficult to show the connection between your choice to reduce your price and the agency releasing that information. But it could be, if you can make that connection, it could be something protestable, certainly.
Okay, awesome. Well, hey, we're going to cut it there. What I'd like to encourage you guys to do, for those of you guys, if we didn't get to your question, please use our Gavology Nation as a way to go to ask your question there. We're always there. Steven's there. I think you're there, Nicole. I know Shane is there. And we have, 2,000 other members in Gavology Nation. That's our private LinkedIn group. You could go to www.gavology, GOVOLOGY.com/nation. Just request access and we'll get you right in there. But anyway, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much again, Stephen and Nicole, for your time today. And with that, any last words before we close?
I would love to
ahead,
we both
Nicole.
will, yeah. Super quickly, a couple of these questions at the end here, they seem to be about what's required for debriefing, what the agency's duties are. That's going to depend again very much on what part of the FAR it's set aside under, or it's issued under, I guess. So if it's FAR 15, there's going to be some debrief requirements. Generally, the agency can take as much time as it wants to respond to things, but that's a good case. If you're not sure, go talk to an attorney, or figure out what it'll usually say. This is issued under FAR part whatever. And if it mentions 15, requirements automatically jump. Same with DOD, they have some more requirements. And then I think as a good takeaway today, there was one question kind of about trends with protests sustained and not sustained. So I would love to finish up with that, which is, in my opinion, obviously fact specific, obviously talking to an attorney. But I think the biggest message most attorneys in this line of work and experts are going to tell you is, the more you're leaning toward things that are agency discretion, I just don't like this. I think I should have got more strengths. Anytime you borderline bad faith, those just generally, no matter how badly you think the agency did, don't tend to succeed as often. What we tend to see more success at GAO, it's those arguments where either the solicitation says something very different than what your debrief says or what was done in the end, direct contradictions in the solicitation, the proposal, and maybe direct contradictions from the FAR. Those are where the language itself points to, no matter how small that issue may be, we tend to see more success there. But again, big picture, talk to experts. Your PTAC can often give you, or Apex can really give you good advice on things too, until you do need that legal advice, following things like this, and then reaching out to me if you need me.
All righty.
Yeah, thanks for
Steven?
having me.
Yeah,
Yeah, great.
absolutely.
No, thank you, Carol and Nicole. Just to pick up the last thread on the debriefing, Worth noting that GAO will not hear a protest that your debriefing was inadequate or that the agency failed to give you a required debriefing. That one pops up a lot. I just saw a case on that a few days ago. So people complain about that. GAO's position is that that's more of an administrative matter that's not within the protest function. So don't file a protest at GAO saying I didn't get a debriefing or my debriefing didn't hit all the points that's required by the FAR. That will just get argument will just get dismissed. But again, yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thank you as always, Carol, for hosting this. Wonderful to see you, Nicole, and thanks for being my tag team partner on this one. Really appreciate it.
Loved it.
All right. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next month. Maybe we'll see Nicole if she's available. And again, third Wednesday of every month, 1 to 2:30 Eastern time, if you want to mark your calendar. Also, we usually post the upcoming shows on our website at gavology.com/roundup. So we'll have our next one posted soon, and we'll also get an email out to you guys on that. But with that, we will say goodbye, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.